Hello, welcome. Happy Wednesday. So today I'm going to be talking about the difference between sand tray and sand play therapy. So if you're a mental health professional and you have been curious about using sand, the sand tray, and the symbols in your clinical work with your clients, especially children and adolescents, and you've been wondering of what the difference is between sand tray and sand play, and is there even a difference, and does it really even matter? What the heck? Today I'm going to talk about that and clear that up. So I'm Kathy Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a registered play therapist supervisor here in the United States. And I have been working with children, adolescents, and families for almost 30 years in the psychotherapy world. So today, and I go live every Wednesday at 7 a.m. It's early here, but it gets my day going. 7 a.m. Pacific time. So every Wednesday, 7 a.m. Pacific time, I go live and talk about all things play therapy and expressive arts on LinkedIn, YouTube, and in my Facebook group for mental health professionals using play therapy and expressive arts with children, adolescents, and families. And that group is called Play and Expressive Arts Therapy Playground. If you're interested in the group, hop on over there. All right, so today I am going to talk about the difference between sand play and sand tray, and why does it even matter? Semantics. And the reason I decided to go ahead and talk about this topic is, as I've been doing trainings over the last couple decades now, one of the things that I noticed is there is a lot of confusion in the mental health field, especially professionals working with children and adolescents. There seems to be a lot of confusion about the difference between sand play and sand tray, and I've noticed that these terms get used interchangeably. And it first really caught my attention when I was co-facilitating with a mental health professional who has been using and training mental health professionals to use sand play for many decades. And I heard her talk about the difference and why it was so important. And then it really kind of struck me that there's a little bit of an ethics aspect to it as well as really making sure you get grounded in whatever theoretical model that you're using when you're using the sand tray and the miniatures. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And if you are joining, go ahead and post. If you're watching live, post your name in the comments, where you're from. I love to see where people are from. If you have any questions, feel free to post those in the comments. If you're watching on the replay, go ahead and post your name in the comments. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear what type of sand therapy you're using. What's your favorite thing about using sand therapy if you're using it? Go ahead and post that in the comments. If you're watching live, post in there as well. If you find this useful and helpful, feel free to like it and share it with your colleagues. Alrighty, so first and foremost, I'm going to do a little historical nerdy stuff. And the reason for that is I really think it's important to understand some of the history behind the theoretical model that you're using, because it gives a little more depth to the theory and kind of helps you understand how it evolved and how it came to be and the reason it came to be. So for sand play therapy has been around for decades. And in fact, it has its historical roots in getting grounded and using the earth in a spiritual way for healing. And then using sand more specifically to help integrate that into clinical work with children and adolescents. So think about it. If you're a kid, remember when you went to the beach and you could feel your toes in the sand? And as a kid, you would sit down by the water where you could build your sand castles and you were covered with sand, and how amazing that felt. Well, that's where the historical roots come from as far as how it got integrated into the sand play process. So one of the originators for sand play, it got its start with Margaret Lowenfeld, who was a child psychiatrist, and she first started using what she called the sand world technique. And when she started the sand world technique, it was using a Freudian analytic theory model. And this came after reading H.G. Wells' book called Floor Games. So this was pretty novel back in their time, in which you got, as a parent, you would get on the floor and play with your child, play with toys, which was pretty revolutionary back then. And so she was inspired by that book and found ways to use miniatures. And then she used a big tin tray, and eventually it got included with sand. And then Dora Cough heard about the work that Margaret Lowenfeld was doing. She went over there, trained with Margaret Lowenfeld, and then Dora Cough is really credited with being kind of like the mother of sand play. She learned the world technique and then integrated it using Jungian analytic theory, and that's really where sand play comes from, is using the sand, the miniatures, and the sandbox. And there's a certain size for the sandbox based on what the eye can take in, and applying Jungian analytic theory with that. And if you're a sand play therapist, then you will have studied Jungian theory. You would have studied how to apply it using the miniatures in the sand tray. There's a whole way of being with your client in the sand play room. And sand play therapists also do a lot of their own personal work in the sand under the supervision of a sand play supervisor or someone who kind of mentors them through that process and helps them fully integrate that theory model using sand play. So so sand tray is different. Sand tray is more of a generalized application of the use of sand, the tray, and the miniatures. And sand tray uses a variety of different theoretical models. So if you think about that, the theory model drives the application, and that's a really important difference. Most of us, if you're in the mental health field, you'll know most of us use an integrated approach. Well, the same is true with the sand therapy. So sand tray is really more of a generalized application of different theoretical models. And so when you're using that integrated approach, if you're using sand tray, my opinion, you still need to have an idea of what theoretical model that you're using with the sand with the sand tray, because it makes a difference as to how you apply that theoretical model. And most of the play therapy models will integrate in the sand and the sand tray and the miniatures. So for instance, my default mode is using child-centered play therapy. So if I'm using child-centered play therapy, the way in which the sand tray gets utilized will be based on child-centered play therapy. If I'm using a different approach, then I'm going to use it based on that theoretical model. And the key thing is making sure that because it is a projective technique, I think it's really important to make sure you get the training as well as the supervision or consultation because it's projective. It took a long time to really learn to be comfortable and feel like I knew what I was actually doing. And to me, that's where the training came in really, really handy, as well as the other part that was really, really important for me. And I think for most of us, when we're learning a new theoretical model to use with our clients, is getting that supervision to help me figure out with my clients what the different themes look like in the sand tray, how to use it, how am I going to be, what theoretical model that I'm going to use. So that to me is still really important, is when you're using this model and you're using an integrated approach, you really want to think about and be mindful of what is the theoretical model that you're using, because that's going to drive the application. So in the end, does it really matter if you say sand tray or sand play? And I say yes, because there are two very distinct applications. Sand play, if you say you're using sand play, then you're saying that you use a Jungian application. And that's what it communicates to other professionals. That's the theoretical model that you're using. You would have been through the training to help learn how to apply that. You would have been through the supervision to make sure on a case-by-case basis you're applying it and understanding and conceptualizing what's going on in the treatment process. Sand tray is an integrated approach. It's basically everything else, but you're still making sure you apply a theoretical model. And I give the example of, so I'm a registered play therapist. It took me 7 years to get fully through the process of when I started learning play therapy. I started taking all the trainings. There's 150 hours of CEs that you have to take, and they have to be in certain categories. You have to get supervision from somebody who's a play therapist supervisor who has gone through the process themselves. And then you also have to do that supervision while you're working with clients. So there's a whole process that you have to go through in order to make sure that you understand the theory model that you're using, how it's applying, and it was a lot of time and investment, and it was worth it, because I remember when I wasn't trained and I was trying to use the sand tray and I was trying to use play therapy, the difference between when I took the training and prior to taking the training was huge. And the thing is, sand play and sand tray have overlap. They both they both use a sand, they both use a sand tray, and they both use miniatures. And you can see from my background, I have a lot of miniatures. There's a certain way, based on the way I've been trained, there's a certain way that I store my sand tray miniatures, which you can see in the background here. I store them standing up. I have them in categories. I have different kinds of categories. All of that is really based on the training and supervision that I was under to get to the process. I am not a sand play therapist, though, because I did not study specifically under a sand play supervisor learning how to apply Jungian analytic theory. So I consider myself to be more of a sand tray therapist, working in the sand. And And so they both, sand tray and sand play, both look at themes and and they use those themes to help conceptualize what's going on in the client's progress, what they're working through. It also drives that interaction, how the therapist interacts with with their client. So sand play, that application, sand play, is used with all ages, including adults. And to be honest, I love using sand tray with adults, especially adults who are working through some pretty significant attachment wounds and trauma. It is a phenomenal way to help them work through that. So, recap for today. Doesn't matter if you say sand play or sand tray, I say yes. To me, it's the same if I say I'm a play therapist, a registered play therapist, versus do I use play therapy in the way as a registered play therapist, or have I not been trained and I have toys in my playroom, but I've not really been trained in the theory and the application. To me, it's kind of the same. The difference between how you apply it if you've been trained, I find to be much different than if you're not trained. And that to me is where the ethics part comes in. So sand play, just a recap for today. Sand play has its roots in Jungian theory, and sand play therapy therapists will study Jungian theory and its application, including doing their own personal work. That's what distinguishes sand play therapist from sand tray therapist. Sand tray therapy is a much more generalized application using the sand tray and the miniatures, and you still need to be grounded in a theoretical framework, because that is how you apply that particular projective modality with sand tray. And both models are a projective modality. And so it's important to make sure you get the training and ongoing supervision that's going to help you effectively and ethically apply it. It is a powerful modality, and I know a lot of people are interested in it. I think because we've all heard such great things about it. And I think it's definitely worth investing in yourself as a mental health professional. If this is something that you're interested in, I think it's definitely worth investing in getting started to get a really good grounding. One of the things that I found is if you've not ever used sand tray, or if you're interested in sand play, you want to make sure that you find training that's sand play oriented. If you're interested in more of a generalized, I definitely think it's important to make sure you get the training and make sure, because I've been to so many sand tray trainings, and I've done them for many, many, many years. One of the things that I found is when people are just getting started, and I remember this was me when I was just getting started, it was so overwhelming and confusing. And I had so many questions just about the practical parts of things to help me get started, as well as the theory and the recognizing themes and all of those kinds of things. So I think it's really important to find a training. If you've never taken any, to help you get a really good grounding, make sure you get a training that's going to help you with some of the fundamental basics to give you a really good, solid grounding. That's just that's my recommendation and my opinion. So if you have been using sand therapy, either sand play or sand tray, what model do you use? And what's your favorite thing about it? If you haven't started using it yet and you're interested, what are your questions about it? And feel free to private message me if you'd rather ask those privately, I'd be happy to answer any of those questions for you. Also, after this broadcast ends for today, I'm going to put a PDF in the comments. So if you're looking for the comments, just look below this post, and in the replay, if you're watching in the replay, just look below and you'll see a comment tab. Just click on that and the comments will drop down. I will put it's a free PDF on must-have sand tray miniatures for your sand tray. It kind of addresses a lot of the questions that I typically get from people who are just getting started. What kind of miniatures should I have? I also give some tips on where to find those miniatures and not go broke. Can be a little bit expensive creating your, cultivating your miniature collection. And also, if you're interested, last but not least, I'll also put links to in the comments below. I do have 2 online trainings coming up. The first one's in July. That one is called Getting Grounded Using Sand Tray in the Play Therapy. Really helps to get that really solid, good grounding and also do some experiential. And then the second one is specific for using sand tray therapy with children and adolescents, talking about some of the themes, and as well as going over some of how do you hold and process, which I talk about that in both of the trainings. I would highly recommend taking both if you've never taken any trainings before. I think that'll give you a really good grounding, and you can take them separately. So if you found this helpful today, please like and share it. And also, I go live every Wednesday, so I will see you next week. Bye for now.